The noon heat pressed through the dusty windows of the Gila Bend land office like a punishment. Eli Brennan stood at the rough wooden counter, hat in hand, while Morton Teague slid a paper across with ink-stained fingers. The slap of it hitting wood echoed. $200 in back taxes, Teague said, his voice carrying the pleasure of a man who'd waited years to say it. 60 days, Brennan. Then the territory auctions your well. Eli's jaw tightened. His boot heel scraped the floor. Your grandfather never recorded that claim legal, Teague continued, smirking. Territory law is clear. Behind the counter, a woman in a plain cotton dress scrubbed the ledger stand. Apache, by the way she moved, careful, watching everything. Her eyes met Eli's for one steady heartbeat, then dropped. Teague noticed. She's clearing her father's debt, $50 in unpaid survey fees. He paused. But she ain't worth half that. Eli's hand went to his pocket. How much to clear it? Eli counted out $50 onto Teague's desk. The bills were worn soft as cloth. She's free to go, he said. Teague's fingers swept the money away. Your charity, Brennan. Not charity. Eli turned to the woman. You got a name? Ayanna. Her voice was low, clear. Eli Brennan. I got a ranch a few miles upriver. He paused. You're welcome to ride out, figure what you want to do next. She studied him the way a person studies a map of country they've never traveled. Then she nodded once and walked toward the door. The medicine pouch at her belt swayed with each step. Small, leather, something crumpled inside. Teague's laugh followed them into the heat. The road out of Gila Bend wound through country that looked like God had forgotten to finish it. Red rock and dust and the kind of silence that made a man hear his own thoughts too loud. Eli's bay horse plodded steady. Behind him, Ayanna sat straight on the borrowed saddle, her hands resting easy on the horn. Neither spoke. The only sound was the creak of leather and the horse's breathing, heavy in the dry air. The canyon walls rose on either side, dark iron streaked with rust. Somewhere a hawk cried, high and lonesome. After an hour, Eli pulled the canteen from his saddle and offered it back without looking. Water, he said. The horse first. He glanced over his shoulder. Her face was calm, patient. Not a request, a test. Eli dismounted, poured water into his hat, and let the bay drink. The horse's nose dripped, darkening the dust. When it finished, he offered the canteen again. This time she took it, drank careful, not too much, handed it back. Thank you. They rode on. The windmill appeared first as a black line against the white sky, then took shape, crooked blades turning slow, reluctant. Eli watched it, jaw tight. The thing barely moved. Your well's running dry, Ayanna said. He didn't answer. You didn't buy help, she continued. You bought more problems. The cabin sat in a shallow bowl of land where the canyon opened up, pine logs chinked with old mud, a corral, a barn leaning slightly west, and that windmill creaking like a man with bad knees. The place smelled of dust and horses and years of solitude. Before Eli could dismount, the cabin door swung open. Ruth came out fast, a water bucket in one hand. She was 14, tall for her age, with her mother's dark hair and her father's stubborn jaw. She saw Ayanna and stopped. The bucket slipped, hit the ground. Water spread dark across the dirt. Ruth, Eli started, but his daughter wouldn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on Ayanna, wide and bright with something that wasn't quite anger, wasn't quite fear. This is Ayanna, Eli said, dismounting. The words came out wrong, too formal. She'll be staying a bit, until she figures where she's headed. Ruth's mouth opened, closed. Ayanna slid down from the saddle, smooth and quiet. She walked to the spilled bucket, picked it up, and carried it to the well. The wooden cover groaned when she lifted it. The rope was frayed, rough under her hands. She lowered the bucket, and the splash came from deeper down than it should have. When she pulled it up, the water barely filled half. Ruth watched, still frozen by the cabin door. Ayanna carried the bucket across the yard and held it out. Their eyes met. Ruth took the bucket, turned, and dumped it out. The water hit the dirt and disappeared like it had never been. Ruth! Eli's voice cracked like a whip, but she was already moving, walking past him, past Ayanna, back toward the cabin. At the threshold, she stopped, looked at her father for the first time. Mama's only been gone 3 years. Her voice shook. This is her house. The door slammed. The sound echoed off the canyon walls and died. Ayanna stood in the yard, the empty bucket at her feet. Her face showed nothing, not hurt, not surprise, just that same patient stillness, like a stone in a river that's learned to let the water pass. Eli stared at the dusty horizon, at the dark line where the canyon met the sky. He'd thought saving someone would be simple. Turned out he didn't know the first thing about it. The sun hadn't cleared the canyon rim when the sound of hooves came up the trail. Eli was mending fence by the corral, his hands working wire that kept trying to spring loose. He looked up and recognized the rider before the dust settled. Morton Teague. The land office clerk sat his horse like a man who'd learned to ride late in life. Stiff, careful. He had a leather folder tucked under one arm. His boots shone despite the dirt road. Eli set down his pliers and walked to meet him. "Didn't expect a house call," Eli said. Teague dismounted, brushing dust from his vest. "Thought I'd save you a trip to town," he smiled. Professional courtesy. At the corral, Ayanna was brushing down the bay. She didn't look up, but Eli could tell she was listening. "What brings you out?" Eli asked. Teague opened the folder. The paper inside was crisp, official. The territorial seal stamped in the corner. "Filed this yesterday," Teague said. "New deed, dated 1875, claims the water rights to this well." He held it up so Eli could see. "Surveyor's report says your grandfather never recorded his claim proper. Makes it open territory." Eli's hands went cold. "My grandfather built that well in '62. "Maybe so," Teague shrugged. "But there's no record of it, not in the ledger, not in the territorial office in Tucson. I checked." He tapped the paper. "Law's clear. Possession goes to him who can prove it in writing. You're filing on my land." "I'm filing on unclaimed water rights." Teague's voice stayed pleasant, reasonable. 60 days, Brennan. If you can produce a deed, I'll withdraw. But if you can't—" He let the words hang. Eli stared at the paper. The ink was fresh. The signature, some name he didn't recognize, looked official enough to fool a judge. "This is fraud," Eli said quietly. "That's a serious accusation." Teague folded the paper back into the folder. "Especially coming from a man who's hiding an Apache squatter on territory land." He glanced toward Ayanna. "Won't help your case, that." At the corral, Ayanna's hand stopped moving on the horse's flank. Her face stayed turned away. "She's not a squatter," Eli said. "What is she then?" Eli had no answer for that. Teague mounted his horse, leather creaking under his weight. 60 days, Brennan. Find that deed or this well's mine by law." He was turning his horse when another rider appeared on the trail. Vicente Garcia, the farrier from town. Mexican, with hands like leather and eyes that missed nothing. He rode an old pinto that knew every rock in the canyon. Vicente nodded at Teague as they passed. "Morning, Teague. Heard you moved some stakes last month up near the Prescott line." He said it casual, like commenting on weather. "That usual land office business?" Teague's jaw tightened. "Survey work. Legal boundaries." "Ah." Vicente's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just survey work." Teague spurred his horse and left without another word. "He's stealing it," Vicente said an hour later. They were riding back to town, the three of them, Eli, Vicente, and Ayanna. "Right out from under you." "I need to find the original deed," Eli said. "My grandfather filed it. I know he did." "Then it'll be in the ledger." Vicente glanced at him. "If it hasn't been erased already." The land office smelled of ink and old paper and the sweat of worried men. A different clerk sat at the counter, younger, with Teague's narrow eyes and thin mouth. His cousin, people said. "Need to see the deed records," Eli said. 1862 through 65, and the clerk barely looked up. "What property?" "Section 14, Black River Canyon, Brennan Homestead." The clerk pulled a ledger from the shelf, heavy and leather-bound, flipped through pages, finger trailing down columns, stopped. "No record." "Look again." "No, record." The clerk closed the book. "If it ain't here, it never was." Vicente leaned on the counter. "What about tax receipts?" "Brennan paid 2 years ago. That'd show ownership." The clerk opened a different drawer, shuffled through papers, shook his head. "Nothing here either." "I have the receipt at home," Eli said. "Then bring it." The clerk's voice was flat. "But it won't matter if there's no deed." Vicente's hand caught Eli's arm. "Let's go." Outside, the sun was high and merciless. Eli stood on the wooden walkway, staring at nothing. "They're erasing you from the books," Vicente said quietly. "Every piece of paper that proves you own that land. They're making it disappear." Eli's fist hit the hitching post. The sound echoed down the empty street. When he looked up, Ayanna was watching him from where she stood by the horses. Her hand rested on the medicine pouch at her belt. Just a brief touch, fingers on leather. Then her hand dropped. She turned away and walked toward the horses. Eli watched her go. His shoulders slumped like a fence post that had finally given up fighting the wind. 60 days to prove something that shouldn't need proving, and every piece of paper that could save him was vanishing like water in sand. 3 days passed. Ruth wouldn't speak to anyone. Ayanna worked the ranch like she'd been born to it, hauling water, mending harness leather, scraping rust from tools. She moved through the days quiet as smoke, and Eli couldn't tell if she was waiting for something or just used to being invisible. On the 4th morning, Vicente rode up with a shovel across his saddle. "Got an idea," he said. "You trust me?" Eli looked at the shovel. then at Vicente's face. "How far are we walking?" "Not far, just far enough." They rode east along the canyon rim, the three of them. The sun was already hot, turning the air to glass. Vicente kept his eyes on the ground, reading it the way some men read books. Finally, he stopped, dismounted, and walked 20 paces to where a line of old mesquite grew. "Here," he said. "Here what?" Eli asked. Vicente didn't answer. He started digging. The shovel bit into the hard earth. Once, twice. The sound of it rang out, metal on stone. Vicente knelt, brushed dirt away with his hands. Iron. A boundary stake, old and rust-pitted. But the stamp on top was clear as the day it was forged. Eli's breath stopped. Vicente stood, holding it up to the light. "This is where your grandfather's boundary was, 200 yards east of where your well sits now." He turned to face the canyon. Someone moved the line. "Made your land smaller on paper so they could claim the water." Ayana crouched beside the hole, her fingers tracing the letters stamped into the iron. She nodded slowly, like this confirmed something she'd already suspected. "If we find the new stake," Vicente said, "the one they moved to, and it's got the same stamp, we prove fraud." Eli stared at the old iron in his friend's hands. The rust flaked under Vicente's thumb, revealing darker metal underneath, his grandfather's mark. Proof that the land remembered, even when the ledgers lied. "Who'll believe a Mexican farrier and a broke rancher?" Eli asked. Vicente's smile was thin. "Maybe nobody. But truth is still truth, even if nobody wants to hear it." He handed Eli the stake. The iron was heavy, cold despite the heat, solid. Ayana stood, brushing dirt from her hands. Her eyes met Eli's for just a moment, steady, knowing. Then she walked back to her horse. On the ride home, Eli kept feeling the weight of that iron in his saddlebag, like carrying a piece of his grandfather's will, rusted but unbroken. Evening came slow, the sky turning from white to gold to that deep blue that makes the stars look close enough to touch. Eli was checking the windmill, the gears ground and stuttered, barely pushing water up the pipe, when he heard it, singing, not in English. The words were Apache, low and rhythmic, rising and falling like water over stones. He followed the sound to the well. Ayana knelt there, both hands on the stone rim. Her eyes were closed. The melody wound through the cooling air, older than the canyon, older than any claim or deed or mark on iron. Eli stopped a few yards back, not wanting to interrupt something that felt like prayer. When the song ended, she opened her eyes. "What was that?" he asked. "Water blessing." She dipped her hands into the bucket beside her, let the water run through her fingers. "My father sang it when he filed water rights, said the land remembers songs before it remembers paper." Eli stepped closer. The well smelled of wet stone and minerals, that clean scent of deep earth. "Your father filed water rights?" She looked up at him. In the fading light, her face was all shadows and certainty. 1868, she paused. "Before anyone?" The words hung between them like something that could change everything or mean nothing at all. "Why didn't you say something?" Eli asked. "Back at the land office when Teague was, because I needed to know what kind of man you were first." Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "Whether you'd stolen from me or truly given me freedom." "And?" "You gave me your horse to ride. You let your daughter hate you rather than force her to accept me. You slammed your fist on a post when the law failed you, but you didn't slam it on me." She stood, wiping her hands on her skirt. "That told me enough." The windmill creaked above them. One of the blades was loose, catching wrong. "Would you teach me?" Eli asked. The song. Ayana's surprise showed for just a heartbeat. Then she hummed the first 3 notes, low, middle, low again. He tried, got it wrong. She corrected him, patient. He tried again. This time the notes came closer to right. "Why?" she asked. "Because if your father sang it when he filed, and the land remembers." Eli looked at the well, the windmill, the dark canyon walls rising around them. "Maybe it'll remember we're trying to do right by it, too." She taught him the phrase again, his voice rough against her clear one, but both of them reaching for the same melody. From the cabin window, a shadow moved. Ruth, watching, Ayana saw it too, stopped singing. "She'll come around," Eli said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "Or she won't." Ayana picked up the empty bucket. "Either way, the well still needs water, the land still needs tending." She walked toward the cabin, her footsteps steady in the dust. Eli stayed by the well, staring up at the canyon rim where the last light was dying. Somewhere out there, his grandfather's stakes marked boundaries that paperwork said didn't exist. Somewhere, Ayana's father had filed claims that ledgers claimed never happened. And somewhere, Teague was making sure none of it would matter, unless they found a way to make the land speak louder than the lies. By the end of the first week, They needed supplies. Flour was down to the bottom of the sack, sugar gone, coffee running thin. Eli hitched the wagon while Ayanna stood by the corral, waiting. "You don't have to come," he said. "I know." She climbed up beside him anyway. Ruth came out carrying a list her father had written the night before. She handed it up without a word, then turned back toward the cabin. "Ruth," Eli called. "Town's only 4 miles. I'll stay here." The door closed behind her. Not slammed this time. Just closed, which somehow felt worse. Gila Bend on a Saturday morning was all dust and commerce. Wagons lined the main street, horses tied to every rail. The general store smelled of pickle brine and coffee beans, and the sweat of people who'd ridden too far in too much heat. Eli and Ayanna stepped inside together. The conversations didn't stop exactly. They just got quieter, softer, the way that talk does when it's shifting from weather to something that cuts. Mrs. Garfield stood by the fabric bolts, whispering to Mrs. Chen. Both women glanced toward Ayanna, then away. Eli walked to the counter where Henry Pratt stood, apron-stained, weighing out nails for another customer. When that customer left, Henry pulled out Eli's list, read it over. 30 pounds flour, 10 sugar, 5 coffee, Henry said, not quite meeting Eli's eyes. "That'll be $7. "Put it on account," Eli said. "I'll settle at month's end like always." Henry's hand stopped on the flour barrel. "Account's a bit stretched, Eli. With the auction notice and all. I've paid every bill for 15 years. I know you have." Henry looked genuinely pained. "But the wife says we need to tighten up credit, just until things settle." Behind them, Mrs. Garfield's voice carried just loud enough to be heard. "Heard he's hiding a squaw to dodge the land auction. That's what Teague's saying." Ayanna stood by the door, hands folded, face showing nothing, but Eli saw her shoulders stiffen slightly. He turned back to Henry. "I'll pay cash then." The coins clinked on the counter. $7, most of what he had left after paying Ayanna's debt. Henry scooped them up quick, like they might burn. The store was filling up now. More people coming in for Saturday supplies. Eli loaded flour into the wagon bed while Ayanna carried out the sugar. When she passed the women on the walkway, Mrs. Chen pulled her daughter closer. "Some say Apaches can curse water," Mrs. Garfield said, loud enough. "Make wells go dry just by wishing it." Eli's hands stopped on the flour sack. Ayanna kept walking, steady and straight, loaded the sugar, came back for the coffee. They were almost done when Ruth appeared. She'd ridden in alone, must have saddled the bay, and followed after they'd left. She stood outside the store with a handful of coins, waiting her turn at the counter. Mrs. Garfield saw her. "Ruth, honey, how are you managing? Must be hard with your father bringing in, well, charity cases." Ruth's face went stiff. "That Apache probably cursed your well dry," Mrs. Chen added, trying to sound sympathetic. "Everyone knows they can do that. Maybe your father doesn't understand what he's dealing with." Ruth's jaw worked. Her eyes found Ayanna through the store window, standing by the wagon, hands on the flour sack, pretending not to hear. When Ruth spoke, her voice carried clear across the walkway. "She's not staying." Ruth looked straight at Mrs. Garfield. "My father'll send her back where she came from. Soon as he comes to his senses." The words landed like stones in still water. Eli stood frozen in the wagon bed, a coffee sack in his hands. Ayanna's face stayed perfectly calm, but her hands on the flour sack had gone white at the knuckles. Ruth pushed past everyone into the store, bought her flour, and rode off without looking back. They didn't speak on the ride home. The wagon creaked over ruts, wheels grinding through dust. The sun hammered down. Somewhere a crow called, harsh and mocking. When they reached the ranch, Eli unhitched the wagon while Ayanna carried supplies inside. Ruth's bay stood by the water trough, still saddled. She'd ridden hard. The horse's flanks were dark with sweat. Eli found his daughter in the cabin, pacing, waiting. "Ruth, don't." She spun to face him. Her eyes were red, furious, wet. "Don't tell me I don't understand. Don't tell me I should be kinder." "I wasn't going to say that." Then what?" She took a step forward. Her voice broke. "You replace Mama with her. You give away our land for some Apache charity. Is that what Mama meant to you? 3 years and you're already—" "Stop." Eli's voice was quiet, hard. "Your mother has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this." Ruth grabbed something from the chair, the shawl. Her mother's shawl, wool and faded blue, the one she'd worn every winter. This was hers. This house was hers, and you bring in some woman who— She threw it. The shawl sailed across the room, hit Ayanna, who stood silent in the doorway. Ayanna caught it, stood there holding the soft wool in both hands, looking at it like it was something sacred and broken at the same time. Then she folded it, careful, precise, set it on the table. "Ruth," Eli started, but he didn't know what came next. Didn't know how to bridge the gap between his daughter's grief and his own drowning. Need to do something, anything, right. I don't know how to fix this, he said finally. The words came out raw. Any of it. His voice cracked on the last word. Ruth stared at him, her father, crumbling in front of her. Then she turned and ran to her room. The door slammed so hard dust fell from the rafters. Eli stood in the middle of his cabin, hands shaking. The weight of it all pressing down, the land slipping away, his daughter's hate, the $7 gone. 60 days, becoming 50, 49, 48. He walked out to the barn, leaned against a post, put his head in his hands. The smell of hay and horse and old wood surrounded him. He stayed there while the light changed, while the air cooled, while the day died into dusk. It was full dark when he heard the sound, footsteps, the scrape of a bag being dragged across the cabin floor. Eli walked back slow, stood outside the window. Through the gap in the curtain he could see Ayanna, packing. Her few possessions, dress, comb, the medicine pouch, going into a canvas bag. Ruth stood in her doorway, watching. Ayanna stopped at the well, looked back at the cabin, at the dark canyon walls, at the windmill creaking in the night wind. Then she unpacked this bag. Ruth's voice carried through the open window, barely a whisper. Why don't you just leave? Ayanna's answer came quiet but firm. Because running is what they want. She walked back inside, set the bag down, looked at Ruth standing there in her nightdress, 14 and furious and confused. You can hate me, Ayanna said, but I'm not leaving your father to fight alone. Ruth's face crumpled. She fled back to her room without another word. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that makes a person believe winter's never far away, even in the desert. Eli woke to find the cabin already empty, Ayanna gone somewhere, Ruth's door still closed. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside. The air smelled of sage and that mineral scent the earth gives off before sunrise. He was heading to check the horses when he saw her, a figure moving through the cottonwoods, east of the house, where the small cemetery sat on a rise of ground. His first instinct was to follow. His second was to let her be. He let her be. Ruth had been awake for an hour, sitting by her window, watching the light change. She saw Ayanna leave the cabin, saw her walk toward the graves. She shouldn't follow. She knew that. She followed anyway, quiet, keeping to the shadows where the cottonwoods grew thick, close enough to see but not be seen. Ayanna stopped at the grave with the wooden cross. The name carved there was worn but readable. Margaret Brennan, 1840 to 1873, beloved wife and mother. The Apache woman stood there for a long moment, just looking. Then she knelt. From a pouch at her belt she pulled a bundle of sage, tied with thin sinew. She set it at the base of the cross, her hands gentle, reverent. The morning breeze caught the sage smell, sharp, clean, like smoke without fire. Then Ayanna began to speak, not in English. The words were Apache, soft and rhythmic, and Ruth couldn't understand them but recognized the shape of them. Prayer, or blessing, or apology, maybe all three at once. When the words stopped, Ayanna reached into her bag. She pulled out the shawl. Ruth's breath caught. The blue wool unfolded in Ayanna's hands, still perfectly folded from the night before. She laid it across the grave marker, spreading it careful so it draped like a blanket, like covering someone against the cold. I don't want what was yours, Ayanna said in English now, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not here to replace you. I'm here to protect what you left behind, him and the girl who looks like you, in this land that remembers your footsteps. She pressed her hand flat against the wooden cross. The wood was rough, splintered. He loved you. He still does. That kind of love doesn't end just because breath does. Ruth felt something crack open in her chest, hot and painful and confusing. Ayanna stood, brushed dirt from her knees, and walked back toward the cabin. She didn't see Ruth, hidden in the cottonwoods' shadow. Didn't see the girl's face wet with tears, one hand pressed to her mouth to keep the sound in. Ruth stayed there a long time after Ayanna left. When she finally approached the grave, the shawl lay exactly where it had been placed. She picked it up, held it to her face. It smelled like her mother, or like memory, which was close enough. She folded it, started to take it back to the cabin, stopped, set it back on the grave marker, just as Ayanna had done. When she turned, Ayanna was standing at the edge of the cemetery. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. Ruth walked past her, head down. But when their shoulders almost touched, Ruth whispered two words, "Thank you." It wasn't much, but it was something. Vicente arrived mid-morning with survey maps rolled under his arm and the look of a man who'd been up all night thinking. Eli was replacing boards on the corral fence, hammering nails with more force than necessary. Vicente tied his horse and spread the maps on the porch rail. Got an idea, he said, but you won't like it. I don't like anything these days. Vicente tapped the map. Territorial law's clear. Apache can testify in court if they're married to a citizen, makes them legal witnesses, gives weight to their claims. Eli's hammer stopped mid-swing. You're saying combined claims strengthen your case. Vicente looked him in the eye. Her father filed in 68. You've been working this land since 70. Together, that's continuity. That's occupation. That's something a judge might listen to. I can't ask her to marry me for a piece of paper. Then ask her to help you fight. Vicente rolled up the maps. Ask her if she wants to see that well stay in honest hands or get swallowed by Teague's greed. The cabin door opened. Ayana stepped out carrying a bucket. She'd heard. Must have been near the window. What does the law need? She asked. Vicente looked at Eli. Eli looked at the ground. Marriage certificate, Vicente said. Makes you partners in the eyes of the court. Makes your claims into one claim. Harder to break. Ayana set the bucket down, walked to the porch, looked at the maps Vicente had spread. And this would let me testify? She asked. About my father's filing? Yes. She traced the survey lines with one finger. The paper was old, stained with water and dirt and years of being folded and unfolded. The smell of it, dust and ink and bureaucracy, hung in the air. If marriage is a legal door, she said slowly, I'll walk through it. She turned to Eli. But only if you mean it as partnership, not ownership. Eli opened his mouth, closed it. The words he needed were somewhere deep, buried under 3 years of grief and a lifetime of not knowing how to say the important things. He started. I can't. Ayana waited. The silence stretched. The windmill creaked. Somewhere Ruth was watching from the cabin window, her mother's shawl folded in her arms. Finally, Eli met Ayana's eyes. Partnership, he said. If we do this, it's that. Equal. She nodded once. Then we have 47 days to prove a dead man's claim and a living man's right. We'd better not waste them. Eli went to town alone 3 days later. Not for supplies this time, for answers. Judge Harlan Oakes was due on the circuit in 10 days, and Eli needed to know what kind of man he'd be facing. He never made it to the courthouse. Teague found him first outside the land office, right where it all started. Brennan? Teague's voice was pleasant, but his eyes weren't. Heard you've been asking about the circuit judge. Public record when he arrives. Public record, sure. Teague stepped closer. The smell of bay rum and tobacco came with him, too much of both. But I thought I'd save you the trouble. Judge Oakes gets here in 10 days. Here's cases on the church steps, same as always. And then I'll see him in 10 days. Teague smiled. You know what I like about you, Brennan? You're stubborn. Stupid, but stubborn. He pulled a paper from his pocket, unfolded it slow. This is what the judge is going to see. Clean deed, proper survey, territorial seal, everything legal and proper. Forged. Prove it. Teague's smile widened. And even if you could, which you can't, there's the matter of your witness, that Apache woman. He said the words like they tasted bad. You think Judge Oakes is going to believe her over documented territorial records? She can't even testify. Not legal. Maybe. No, maybe about it. It's law. Teague refolded the paper, tucked it away. But I'm not unreasonable, Eli. I'll make you an offer, right now. Withdraw your claim. I'll drop the back taxes to $100. You keep the cabin and the barn. I get the well and the water rights. Clean split. And if I fight? Teague's pleasant expression never wavered, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Then you lose everything. The ranch, your daughter's respect. He paused. And that squaw goes back to scrubbing floors, or worse. Territorial law's got opinions about Apache women living on white men's land without legal standing. The threat hung in the hot air between them. Eli's hands curled into fists at his sides. Every instinct said to swing. One good hit to wipe that smile off Teague's face. But Vicente's words came back. Truth's still truth, even if nobody wants to hear it. Judge Oakes is a fair man, Eli said quietly. I'll take my chances. For just a heartbeat, something flickered across Teague's face. Not anger, fear. Fair man, Teague repeated. You put a lot of faith in fairness, Brennan. Hope it doesn't disappoint you. He walked away, boot heels clicking on the wooden walkway. Eli stood there, in the dust and heat, watching him go. The land office door stood open behind him, and through it he could see the ledgers on their shelves. All those books full of lies dressed up as law. Why was Teague afraid of Judge Oakes? Evening came soft, the sky turning colors that had no names. Eli sat on the porch, whittling a piece of cedar without much purpose, just keeping his hands busy while his mind ran in circles. The cabin door opened. Ayana stepped out, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and sat on the step beside him. Not too close, not too far. They drank in silence. The coffee was bitter, strong, the way he liked it. Vicente says the judge arrives in 9 days, Ayana said finally. That's what Teague told me too. And what else did he tell you? Eli told her. All of it. The offer, the threat, the fear he'd seen flash across Teague's face when he mentioned the judge's name. When he finished, Ayanna stared out at the canyon. The light was dying fast now, shadows pooling in the low places. I need to ask you something, Eli said, and I need you to know I'm not good at this. At asking. Then just say it. He set down his coffee cup. The wood of the porch was rough under his hands, still warm from the day's heat. Will you marry me? The words came out flat, graceless, not at all how he'd meant them. Ayanna didn't turn her head. For the law? For... He stopped, started again. Vicente says it gives you legal standing, makes us partners in the court's eyes, strengthens the claim. I know what it does legally. Then, I'm asking what it does for you. Now she looked at him. Beyond the paperwork, Eli opened his mouth and found he had no easy answer. The truth was complicated, tangled up with grief and guilt in the strange way this woman had walked into his dying life and made him remember what fighting for something felt like. I can't replace what you lost, he said finally. I'm not trying to. But if we do this, if we stand together in that courthouse, it's real, not a scheme, not me using you. He met her eyes. Partnership, the kind where we both decide what comes next. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached to her belt, to the medicine pouch she'd carried since the day he met her. The leather was worn smooth, darkened by years of handling. She opened it slow. Her fingers drew out something small and folded many times. Paper, yellowed with age, creased so many times the fold lines had nearly torn through. She handed it to him. Eli unfolded it careful. The paper crackled. It smelled of leather and time and something herbal he couldn't name. The words were there in faded ink, official and formal. Certificate of Water Rights, Arizona Territory, filed August 12, 1868. Claimant, John Whitefeather, location, Section 14, Black River Canyon. The territorial seal was stamped at the bottom, a surveyor's signature. Everything proper and legal in 8 years before. Teague's forged deed claimed the land had been empty. Eli's hands started shaking. How long? His voice cracked. How long have you been carrying this? Since my father died. Ayanna's voice was steady, but her eyes held old pain. The soldiers burned our camp, burned everything. I grabbed his medicine pouch and ran. Didn't even know what was inside until weeks later. Why didn't you tell me? Back in the land office? When Teague... Because I needed to know what kind of man you were first. She looked at him directly, no flinching. Whether you'd steal from me, whether you'd use me and throw me away when you got what you wanted. Would I have? She almost smiled. No, that's why I stayed. Eli stared at the certificate. The date, 1868, before his grandfather's will. Before Teague's lies. Before any of this mess started. Legal proof from a dead man's hand that the water belonged to someone the territory barely considered human. This changes everything, he whispered. Only if the judge recognizes it. Ayanna's voice held no illusions. Apache filed deeds aren't usually worth the paper they're written on. Not in a white man's court. Judge Oaks is fair. Fair to who? She took the certificate back, folded it with the same careful creases. But with your claim and mine together, married under territorial law, maybe that's enough weight. Maybe. The windmill creaked in the growing dark. Somewhere a coyote called, high and lonesome. Eli turned to face her fully. I'm asking you to marry me, he said again. Not because I own you. Not because the law needs it, but because... The words stuck. He forced them out. Because fighting alone is how I've been living since Margaret died. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of losing. And maybe with you, he couldn't finish. Ayanna reached out, covered his hand with hers. Her palm was warm, calloused from work. Yes, she said simply. The certificate crinkled between them. 8 years of waiting folded into old paper. One question, Eli said. Why trust me with this now? Her smile was small, sad, knowing. Because you asked me to stand with you, not behind you. She squeezed his hand once. That's the difference between a man who protects and a man who owns. Inside the cabin, Ruth stood by the window, watching them sit together in the dusk. The shawl was in her hands again, but this time she held it different. Not like armor, like something she might be ready to share. The day before the circuit judge arrived, Eli got a message. Not official, just a boy from town, saying Judge Oaks wanted to see him at the church, private-like. Eli found him sitting on the steps in the late afternoon shade. A man in his 60s with silver hair and hands that had seen hard work before they'd held a gavel. He was reading from a small Bible, leather-worn and soft. Mr. Brennan. The judge closed the book. Sit. Eli sat on the step below him. The church smelled of old wood and candle wax and the particular silence of a place people bring their hardest questions. I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow, Oaks said. Off the record. Yes, sir. The judge was quiet for a moment, looking out at the street where dust devils spun in the heat. "I've been a circuit judge for 12 years, he said finally. Seen every kind of land dispute there is. Claim jumpers, forged deeds, boundary fights, water rights. Most of them are pretty clear-cut. Somebody's lying, and the paperwork shows who. But I've never ruled on an Apache filed deed." Oakes turned to look at him. "Not once. And that's not because Apache don't file claims. Some do, proper and legal. It's because the courts don't want to recognize them." Eli's chest tightened. "Precedent's thin," the judge continued. "If I rule in your favor, in her favor, every land claim in this territory gets challenged. Every settler who thought their deed was solid suddenly has to wonder if there's an Apache filing from years back that supersedes it. So you'll rule for Teague." "I didn't say that." Oakes's voice was firm. "I'll rule for evidence, for truth, as best I can see it. But Eli," he leaned forward, "be prepared for the law to fail you. Be prepared for me to make the legal decision, even if it's not the just one." The words hit like a fist. "Then why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know what you're walking into." The judge stood, old knees creaking. "And because I want you to answer one question honest. Do you trust her?" Eli thought about Ayanna teaching him the water song, about her refusing to run, about the certificate she'd carried for years, waiting for someone worthy of it. "More than I trust myself," he said. Judge Oakes nodded slowly, something shifting in his expression. "Then maybe that's enough." He picked up his Bible. Maybe. He walked into the church, leaving Eli alone on the steps with the weight of maybe pressing down like the whole Arizona sky. Eli rode home slow, the conversation turning over in his mind. When he reached the ranch, Vicente was already there, shovel in hand, standing with Ayanna by the spot where they'd found the old boundary stake. "Thought we'd dig the new well today," Vicente said. "Show people what cooperation looks like." Who's watching?" Eli asked. Vicente nodded toward the mesa rim. 3 riders sat their horses in silhouette against the sky, too far to identify, but close enough to see. "Town's curious," Vicente said. "Figured we'd give them something to be curious about." They started digging. The earth was hard, reluctant. The shovel rang against rocks, and Eli's hands remembered the feel of this work, blisters and ache, and the particular satisfaction of breaking ground. Vicente worked beside him, both men falling into the rhythm of it. After an hour, Ruth came out of the cabin. She stood watching, arms crossed, something working behind her eyes. Ayanna knelt by the growing hole, singing. The same melody she'd taught Eli, low notes rising and falling like water over stone. The sound of it drifted across the yard, across the canyon, maybe all the way to those riders on the ridge. Vicente started humming, not the Apache song, something else. A Mexican work song his father had taught him, about digging wells and finding water in impossible places. Different melody, different words, but somehow the rhythms matched. Eli stopped digging to listen. Then Ayanna looked up at him, and there was a question in her eyes. He tried to join her song. Got the first 3 notes she'd taught him, fumbled the 4th, tried again. His voice was rough against her clear one, but both of them reaching for the same melody now, weaving through Vicente's humming like 3 different threads making one rope. Ruth took a step forward, then another. She opened her mouth, and harmony came out. Soprano against Ayanna's alto, tentative but true. The song her mother used to sing while kneading bread, while mending clothes, while rocking her to sleep. Different words, different tune, but somehow finding the spaces between what the others were singing. 4 voices, Apache, Mexican, 2 kinds of American. All of them singing about water, about the earth giving up what it holds deep. When they stopped, the silence felt holy somehow. Ruth looked at Ayanna, really looked, for the first time, without anger. "I don't know the words to yours," Ruth said quietly. "I don't know the words to yours either," Ayanna replied. "But maybe that's all right." Vicente drove the shovel into the pile of dirt. "I think we're deep enough for today. Tomorrow we finish." He didn't say it, but they all knew. After the judge decided whether there'd be anything left to finish, Ayanna walked to the cabin and came back carrying something folded. The shawl. Her mother's shawl, blue wool faded soft with years. She'd put it on like she had every right to wear it. Ruth's breath caught. But then, Ayanna came close, and Ruth saw what she hadn't seen before. How carefully it had been folded, how gently it was worn, not claimed, honored. "It keeps falling off my shoulders," Ayanna said. "The way I tie it is different from how your people do." It was an offering, a bridge made of wool and honesty. Ruth stepped forward. Her hands shook slightly as she reached up and adjusted the shawl, pulling it across Ayanna's shoulders the way her mother had worn it, the way she'd learned by watching 1,000 winter mornings. "Like this," Ruth said, her voice cracked. "You cross it in front and tuck the ends so the wind can't get under." "Thank you." As they stood there, the older woman and the girl, the shawl between them like a treaty neither had expected to sign. Vicente cleared his throat. Those riders are still watching. Eli looked up at the ridge. The three figures hadn't moved. Couldn't tell if they were here to witness or to report back to Teague. Let them watch, he said. Let them see what it looks like when people stop fighting each other long enough to dig for water. Aina began singing again, softer now. The evening song, the one that thanks the earth for giving. Ruth listened, and after a moment she hummed along. Not the words, just the feeling of them. The sun was dropping behind the canyon rim, painting everything gold in shadow. The hole in the ground was 4 feet deep, not much yet, but deeper than it had been that morning. Tomorrow, the judge would arrive. Tomorrow, the law would speak. But tonight, 4 people stood around a hole in the ground and sang about water they hadn't found yet, about hope that might still be enough. The riders on the ridge turned their horses and left. But Eli couldn't tell if they'd seen friends or enemies. He supposed by tomorrow they'd all know. The church steps were packed by the time the sun cleared the canyon rim. Every bench dragged from inside. Every available space filled with bodies. The whole territory seemed to have turned out. Ranchers and farmers, shopkeepers and drifters, people who'd never cared about water rights until the day an Apache woman claimed some. Judge Oaks sat at a table someone had carried from the general store, his gavel and law books spread before him. He looked tired already, and court hadn't even started. Eli stood to one side with Ayanna and Vicente. Ruth sat in the front row, the shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders despite the heat. Across the aisle, Morton Teague sat alone, a stack of papers in front of him, looking like a man who'd already won. The smell of sweat and dust and nervous anticipation hung thick in the morning air. Judge Oaks banged his gavel once. The sound cracked across the crowd like a rifle shot. This is a hearing on water rights. Section 14, Black River Canyon, he said. Territory of Arizona versus Brennan. Mr. Teague, you filed the claim. Present your case. Teague stood, smoothed his vest. Your Honor, the facts are simple. This deed, he held up the paper, territorial seal bright in the sun, filed in 1875, shows clear water rights to the well in question. Survey documentation, proper registration, everything according to law. And Mr. Brennan's claim? There is none. Teague's voice was confident, measured. No deed on file. No registration. The land office has no record of any Brennan claim prior to 1875. That's because you erased it, Eli said. The gavel came down. You'll have your turn, Mr. Brennan. Mr. Teague, do you have witnesses? The documentation speaks for itself, Your Honor. Very well. Judge Oaks turned. Mr. Brennan, your evidence? Eli stood. His mouth was dry, his hands sweating. Public speaking had never been his strength. I have a witness, Your Honor, Vicente Garcia. Vicente came forward, hat in hand. When he placed his hand on the Bible, his fingers were steady. Mr. Garcia, Judge Oaks said, what do you know about this claim? I'm a farrier, Your Honor. Been shoeing horses in this territory for 20 years. Part of my work is checking boundary markers, making sure stakes are sound, property lines are clear, and Vicente pulled something from his coat. 2 iron stakes, one rusted nearly black, the other newer. He set them on the table with a heavy thunk. Found these 3 weeks ago. The old one, he pointed, 200 yards east of where the current well sits. Got EB stamped on top, Eli's grandfather's mark. Been there since 1862 by the look of the rust. Murmurs ran through the crowd. The new one, Vicente continued, was at the current boundary line. Same stamp, same EB. Only this one's maybe 2 years old. Someone moved it. Teague shot to his feet. That's conjecture. Those stakes could have come from anywhere. Could have, Vicente said calmly. Except I talked to the blacksmith who made them. Old man Patterson, over in Mesa Verde. He keeps records. Made 6 stakes for Edward Brennan in 1862. Made 6 more for Morton Teague in 1874. He looked at Teague. Funny thing, you asked him to copy the old stamps exact? The crowd erupted. Judge Oaks hammered his gavel 3 times. Order! I'll have order! When the noise died down, he turned to Teague. You moved boundary stakes? That's a lie. I did survey work. Legitimate. You asked a blacksmith to forge another man's property markers. The judge's voice was ice. That's fraud, Mr. Teague. It's circumstantial. He has no proof that I... Show me your ledger. Teague went pale. My what? Your land office ledger. The one that records all claims, all changes, all surveys. Judge Oaks leaned forward. Bring it here. Teague's hands fumbled with his satchel. Pulled out the leather-bound book, set it on the table. The judge opened it, flipped through pages, stopped, tilted the book to catch the light. There are entries crossed out here, he said. Scratched through, changed. He looked up. Including what appears to be an 1862 Brennan filing. Clerical errors, Convenient errors. The judge closed the book. Mr. Brennan, you said you have another witness? Eli's throat was tight. Yes, Your Honor, my wife. The crowd stirred. Some hadn't known about the marriage yet. Mrs. Brennan, Judge Oaks said. Come forward. Ayanna stood. She wore a simple dress, her hair braided, the blue shawl across her shoulders. Every eye in that crowd followed her as she walked to the witness stand. When she placed her hand on the Bible, her fingers didn't shake. State your name, the judge said. Ayanna Brennan, she paused. Born Ayanna Whitefeather. Something flickered across Judge Oaks's face. Quick, gone almost before it registered. Mrs. Brennan, what do you know about this land claim? From the folds of the shawl, she drew out the medicine pouch, opened it. The old paper unfolded in her hands with that familiar crackle. My father filed water rights to this land in 1868, she said, before Mr. Teague, before the current disputes. He followed every law, paid every fee, received this certificate from the territorial surveyor. She handed it to the judge. Judge Oaks took it like it might burn him, read it slowly, carefully. His hands started to shake. Your father's name, he said quietly. What did he sign? John Whitefeather. The judge stood abruptly. His chair scraped against wood. The sound echoed. This court will take the 5-minute recess. Your Honor, Teague started. 5 minutes. The gavel came down like judgment itself. Judge Oaks walked into the church. Through the open door, people could see him pacing, one hand pressed to his forehead. Eli looked at Vicente. Vicente shrugged. After exactly 5 minutes, the judge returned. His face was composed, but something had changed in his eyes. This certificate, he said, is authentic. I know because I witnessed the filing. He looked directly at Ayanna. Your father, John Whitefeather, was an Apache scout. He saved my life in 1868 during a raid near the Prescott line. Carried me 6 miles with a bullet in my leg. When he filed this claim, I signed as witness. The crowd erupted again. Teague's face drained of all color. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. What's irregular? Judge Oaks said, his voice cutting. Is a land office clerk forging deeds, moving boundary stakes, and attempting to steal water rights from both a settler family and an Apache veteran who served this territory with honor. He turned to Ayanna. You may continue your testimony. She spoke then in Apache, the words flowing clear and strong. Most of the crowd couldn't understand, but they heard the certainty in it, the way the syllables carried the weight of truth. Then she repeated it in English. My father sang a water blessing when he filed this claim. He said, the land remembers songs before it remembers paper. He said, water has memory. He said, her voice caught just for a moment. He said, if you treat the earth with respect, it will remember your name long after the ledgers burn. The judge's eyes were wet. Your Honor, Teague said desperately, Apache testimony isn't legally binding. Even if she's married to, sit down. The judge's voice could have frozen fire. Mr. Teague, you moved boundary stakes. You forged property markers, you altered official ledgers, and you attempted to use the law as a weapon against both a widow and an Apache veteran's daughter. He picked up his gavel. I'm ruling in favor of the Brennan household. Water rights to remain with current occupants. Taxes dismissed due to clerical fraud and documented harassment. The gavel came down. Furthermore, I'm referring you to the U.S. Marshal for prosecution on charges of deed fraud and property theft. Teague collapsed into his chair like all his strings had been cut. The crowd sat in stunned silence. Then someone in the back, one of the farmers who'd watched them dig the well, started clapping. Slow at first, then faster. Others joined. Not everyone, but enough. Vicente gripped Eli's shoulder. Ruth was crying, her face buried in the shawl. Ayanna stood at the witness stand, the certificate still in her hands, and for the first time since Eli had met her, she smiled. Not a small smile, not a careful one. A smile that held 8 years of carrying her father's proof. 8 years of being told she didn't belong. 8 years of waiting for someone to finally listen. Judge Oaks stepped down from the bench and walked to her, extended his hand. Your father was a good man, he said quietly. One of the best I've known. I'm sorry it took this long for the law to remember him. Ayanna shook his hand. The land already remembered, she said, like the law just needed to catch up. The U.S. Marshal arrived within the hour, summoned from his office 2 streets over. He was a thick man with gray in his beard, and the look of someone who'd seen every kind of law-breaking there was. Morton Teague, he said, you're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and theft of territorial property. And Teague didn't fight, just sat there at the table, while the marshal pulled his arms back and locked the irons on. The click of metal on metal seemed louder than it should have been. As they led him away, Teague looked at Eli, no anger in his face now. Just the hollow confusion of a man who'd built his whole world on lies and couldn't understand why they'd stopped holding. I was going to be somebody, he said quietly. You were somebody, Judge Oakes replied. Just not somebody worth being. They walked him down the street toward the jail. The crowd parted to let them through, then closed again like water around a stone. Eli stood on the church steps with Ayanna beside him, Vicente on his other side, Ruth just behind. The whole town seemed to be looking at them, measuring, deciding. Henry Pratt from the general store approached first, took off his hat, held it against his chest. I was wrong to doubt your credit, he said. Any account you need, it's open. Eli nodded. Appreciate that, Henry. Mrs. Garfield came next, though she couldn't quite meet Ayanna's eyes. I spoke out of turn, she said, about curses and such. It was ignorance talking. Yes, Ayanna said simply. It was. The woman flinched, then nodded and walked away. Not everyone came forward. Some stood back, arms crossed, faces closed. Change came slow in the territory, and some folks weren't ready for it yet. But enough people approached, enough handshakes, enough mumbled apologies, enough cautious offers of neighborliness, that it felt like maybe something had shifted. Ruth stood beside Ayanna through all of it, not touching, not speaking, just there, present. When one old rancher asked Eli if the Apache woman would be staying, Ruth spoke before her father could. Her name is Ayanna Brennan, Ruth said clearly, and yes, she's staying. The old rancher looked between them, father, daughter, the woman with the shawl, and something like understanding crossed his weathered face. Well then, he said, reckon we'll see you at the well digging? Eli felt Ayanna's hand slip into his. Her fingers were warm, steady. If you're willing to dig alongside Apache and Mexican alike, he said. The rancher thought about that, then nodded slowly. Ground don't care who's holding the shovel, he said, long as the digging gets done. By afternoon, 20 people had gathered at the ranch. Some brought shovels, others brought food, bread and dried meat and someone's preserved peaches. Ruth moved among them like her mother might have done, offering water, thanking people for coming. The hole they'd started was already 4 feet deep. Vicente marked out the dimensions, and the work began. It should have been awkward. Settler families and Mexican laborers and one Apache woman all working the same ground. It should have been tense. Instead, it was just work. The sound of shovels biting earth, the grunt of effort, the thud of dirt hitting the growing pile, the smell of sweat and dust and the minerals rising from deep soil. Someone passed a canteen. Someone else told a joke in Spanish. Laughter rippled through the group. Ayanna knelt at the edge of the hole and began to sing, the water blessing. The same song her father had sung, the same melody Eli had learned in pieces. Her voice rose clear and strong, filling the canyon with sounds that predated any deed or law or territorial claim. Vicente joined in next. Not the same words. His were in Spanish, a prayer his grandmother had taught him about finding water in dry places. But the rhythms matched, weaving through Ayanna's melody like two streams joining. Eli tried to follow. His voice was still rough, still uncertain, but he knew the shape of it now. The first 3 notes, then the fourth, then the rising phrase that spoke of gratitude for water, not yet found. And then Ruth. She stood at the pile of dirt, corn seeds in her cupped hands, and she sang. The hymn her mother used to sing on Sunday mornings, about grace and living water and how the desert blooms. Different words, different faith, but somehow finding the spaces between what the others were singing. 4 voices, 4 languages, 4 ways of asking the same ancient question. Will the earth provide? The people working stopped to listen. Some of them knew parts of the songs. A few joined in, tentative at first, then stronger. The canyon caught the sound and sent it back, multiplied, transformed into something that belonged to everyone and no one. The digging continued deeper, 6 feet. 7. The earth was changing here, getting darker, holding moisture. Then Eli's shovel hit something that wasn't rock, water. It came up slow at first, seeping through the disturbed soil, then faster, rising to fill the bottom of the hole. Cold and clear and clean, it caught the late sun and threw light back at the sky. Someone cheered. Then everyone was cheering, laughing, clapping backs and shaking hands. Ruth knelt at the edge and pressed the corn seeds into the wet earth around the well's rim. 3 seeds on the north side, 3 on the south, 3 each to east and west. Apache tradition and settler hope, planted together in ground that had just proven it could still give life. Vicente pulled something from his saddlebag, a new iron stake, freshly forged. He'd had it made special in Mesa Verde from good steel, meant to last. The stamp on top read, EB+A. He drove it into the ground at the well's edge. The sound of the hammer rang out clear and final, metal on stone, a marker that would outlast all of them, telling anyone who came after that this water belonged to partnership, not possession. The crowd began to disperse as the sun dropped toward the canyon rim. Some lingered to help finish the well cover. Others just wanted to shake hands again, to say goodbye to people who, hours ago, they might not have greeted at all. When the last of them had gone, when Vicente had ridden off with a wave, and Ruth had gone inside to start supper, Eli and Ayanna stood alone by the new well. The water was still rising, finding its level. The sound of it was soft, patient, eternal. "So," Ayanna said quietly, "what will our marriage become now that we don't need it?" Eli looked at her, this woman who'd carried her father's proof for 8 years, who'd stayed when she could have run, who'd stood in front of a hostile crowd and spoken truth in 2 languages. The shawl across her shoulders caught the last light. Blue turned purple in the dusk. "Everything I didn't know I needed," he said. He kissed her then, gentle, careful, like a question that had finally found its answer. She leaned into him, one hand on his chest, and kissed him back. From the cabin window, Ruth watched and smiled. The windmill turned smooth now, its blades catching wind that seemed to blow easier. The well water ran clear and cold. The corn seeds Ruth had planted would sleep through winter and rise in spring. If the rains came, if the land remembered how to be generous. But that was months away. Tonight, 3 people sat on the porch while the stars came out. Ruth was teaching Ayanna to read English from her mother's old Bible. Eli was carving something from cedar, a small bird, wings spread, taking flight. The smell of sage drifted from the hearth inside. Coffee cooled in tin cups. Somewhere a coyote sang, and the canyon sang back. Vicente would come by in the morning with news from town. Teague's properties were being auctioned, the land office getting a new clerk. Judge Oakes staying an extra week to clean up the mess of altered ledgers and fraudulent claims. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, the land held them gentle. The water rose in the new well, cold and patient and older than memory. The certificate that had proven everything was framed now, hanging inside, above the table where people would gather for meals and arguments in the slow, difficult work of building family from pieces that didn't quite fit. Eli set down his carving and looked out at the canyon. The stars were so bright they seemed close enough to touch. "My grandfather used to say this land either breaks you or makes you," he said. Never said it might do both. Ayanna's hand found his in the darkness. "Maybe that's what makes something worth keeping," she said, "knowing it cost you everything to hold on to." Ruth closed the Bible, marked her place with a ribbon. "Mama used to say that too," she said softly. Different words, same meaning. They sat together as the night deepened, 3 people who'd found each other in the wreckage of loss and law in the particular cruelty of a system that forgot to count some lives as mattering. The land had remembered when the ledgers lied. The water had risen when the law tried to steal it. And now, in this small canyon, where boundaries had been moved and moved back, where 4 different songs could somehow make one prayer, where paper and truth had finally aligned, now there was something worth calling home. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And maybe, in the end, that was enough. Now, I reckon some folks wonder if that well still runs. It does. Clearer than ever, cold enough to make your teeth ache on a hot day. Vicente comes by twice a year to check the windmill gears, and every time he leaves, that thing turns a little smoother. The corn Ruth planted that day came up green the following spring. Apache corn, from seeds Ayanna's grandmother saved before the soldiers came. It grows tall beside settler wheat now, both of them drawing from the same water, both of them bending in the same wind. Seems the ground don't care much about the politics of what it feeds. Took time for the town to come around. Some never did. Mrs. Garfield still crossed the street when she saw Ayanna, right up until she didn't. Mrs. Chen brought over soup when Ayanna got sick that first winter. Didn't say much, just left it on the porch and walked away. Small gestures. But you build a bridge, 1 stone at a time, my grandfather used to say. Rush it, and the whole thing falls. Ruth learned Apache from Ayanna, and Ayanna learned to read English from Ruth. They'd sit on that porch in the evenings, trading words back and forth like currency neither had known they needed. Sometimes I'd hear them laugh, both of them together, and I'd have to stop whatever I was doing just to listen. That sound, more than any legal document, told me we'd done something right. The certificate hangs framed in the cabin now, right above the table where we take our meals. Next to it, my grandfather's surveyor tools, compass, measuring chain, the old stake with his mark. 2 men who never met, separated by a war and a massacre and 6 years of history, but both understanding the same truth: water's life, and the land remembers who treats it with respect. Judge Oakes came by 3 months after the trial, unofficial-like. Sat on the porch with me and Ayanna, drank coffee, told stories about her father. Turned out, John Whitefeather had saved more than just the judge's life. He'd carried 2 wounded soldiers 12 miles through Apache country, singing the whole way so they wouldn't give up. That's the kind of man whose claim should never have been questioned. But then, should-haves don't change what was. Teague died in territorial prison 2 years later. Fever, they said. I didn't go to the funeral. Didn't celebrate either. Just a man who chose greed over truth and paid the price the law demands. I pray sometimes that he found peace before the end. But Mostly I just pray I never become the kind of man who measures his worth by what he can take from others. Ayanna's belly started showing around that second spring. Ruth noticed first, got quiet for a day, then came out of her room and said, "I hope it's a boy. A girl would have to share a room with me." We all laughed, and that was that. Another life coming, another generation that would grow up knowing water is sacred. Boundaries are only as good as the people who respect them, and family isn't always the one you're born into. The windmill still creaks sometimes, especially when the wind comes up strong from the south, but it's a good sound. The sound of something working, something maintained, something that knows its purpose and keeps turning regardless of who's watching. Vicente says the new boundary stake, the one with both our initials, is already getting that weathered look like the land's claiming it. "Give it 10 years," he said, "and nobody will remember it was ever new." That's how it should be. The best markers are the ones that look like they've always been there. I paid $50 for Ayanna's freedom that day in Teague's office. Thought I was doing charity. Thought I was saving someone. Turned out, she paid everything for mine. Taught me that protecting isn't the same as owning. That partnership means standing beside, not in front of. That the land remembers kindness longer than it remembers law. That's the kind of debt you spend a lifetime grateful to owe. And every morning when I draw water from that well, when I hear 3 languages spoken at my breakfast table, when I see Ruth teaching her new brother or sister the same songs in 2 tongues, I think about my grandfather's stake buried in the earth, about Ayanna's father's certificate on the wall, about how sometimes the only way forward is to dig deep enough to find where the truth was hidden all along. The water keeps rising, the corn keeps growing, the windmill keeps turning, and the land, patient as ever, keeps teaching us how to belong.